Friday. I was just saying to somebody, I can count on one hand how many Good Fridays that we've not had rain. It just seems to be one of those things. But anyway, we're going to try to hit the high points of a lot of different systems today. So put on your seatbelts. We're talking about the immune system. Okay, so if I ask, what are the two main types of immunity, you're going to say innate and adaptive. And if I ask you what the first line of defense is in the innate, you're going to say skin, unbroken skin, and outer barriers of brains. The second line of defense would be internal defenses, where you have phagocytic cells, which are usually white blood cells, natural killer cells, antimicrobial proteins, and inflammatory response. And that's in all animals, whereas the bottom adaptive immunity is really just for vertebrates. And so it's a lot more specialized. And so what are the two types of adaptive immunity? Humoral, which means blood or fluids, and also cell-mediated response. What are the types of lymphocytes that are involved in the humoral response? B cells, very good, B cells, which end up producing plasma cells, which end up producing antibodies. So we associate B cells with antibodies, and antibodies hook up with foreign antigens in order to try to help destroy them. Now, the cellular mediated response, you have two types of cells. They're T cells instead of B cells. And you have helper T cells and you have cytotoxic T cells. And actually, the helper T cells are the main mediator of the whole adaptive response. As we saw, if we were somewhere around here, this is a really good outline of whoops, a little too far. Of how it all fits together. And it is even a lot more complicated than this. But the thing about the adaptive immune system too is they produce memory cells. So the memory cells help your body remember if they encounter this particular type of antigen, which is possibly a pathogen. Again, then you have already built up military arsenal to help to combat that. In the case of HIV, which is immunodeficiency response, human HIV produces, of course, AIDS. I mean, some people can have the HIV virus without actually being full-fledged AIDS, but it obviously can lead to AIDS, which is a suppression of the immune system. We say it compromises the immune system because it affects which T cells primarily? Helper T cells. And then the helper T cells help to call out the B cells and also the cytotoxic T cells. So the T cells are affected in the case of HIV. We were just talking about antibodies. An antibody has this shape. It has two heavy chains and it has two light chains. And they have constant regions where their actual coding is the same, and then variable regions where they can vary so that they can pick up different types of antigens. So at the tips of them, they have a place, see, it's really coming from here. They have a place where the antigen can be, they could bind to the antigen, which is, antigens are not good, they're foreign entities that we're trying to destroy. So you have an antibody-antigen response. You don't have to know a lot of the extra stuff about the antibodies, but if you see a shape like that, it's an antibody, which is part of the B cell humoral response. I think we were talking about the actual inflammatory response. This is just a natural immune situation where the mast cells release histamine, which actually make the capillaries vulnerable to white cells slipping out into the area where you have a splinter or whatever, kind of wall off the area. And that way you kind of ambushed the potential pathogens with the white blood cells and the other parts of the immune system. Now, the lymphatic system, as I initially said on Wednesday, works with the immune system. So we usually discuss the two together, side by side. And the lymphatic system is like almost like a second circulatory system, but it's more designated for helping with ridding the body of potential pathogens. It's not to carry food and to carry oxygen and carry, okay, so you have all these lymph vessels and little lymph nodes, filtering units, where you have lots of white blood cells sitting there to try to phagocytize any of the pathogens that happen to be filtered out. We do see that they get swollen, lymph nodes get swollen sometimes, of course, when there's an infection there. So the fluid that's in the circulatory system is called blood. The fluid that is in the lymphatic vessels is called lymph. Okay. And the lymph includes a lot of the interstitial tissue, which is around the cells where there is a diffusion of food and oxygen and other things. So here's a diagram of where you have a lot of lymphatic tissue. We used to think the appendix had no purpose. It does have lymphatic tissue in it. People do live without it, of course. If it ruptures, that's a bad thing. And you have spew all the intestinal contents into the peritoneal cavity, which could be deadly if you don't have the right antibiotics to kill all the bacteria. The thymus is a lymphatic gland that sits on top of the heart. And the thing about the thymus is, the thing about the thymus is that it gets smaller with age. So it's really not, babies have really big thymuses, and that's for T cell, that's where the T cells actually kind of mature and develop once they're originally made in the bone marrow. So even tonsils and adenoids, the spleen is a lymphatic tissue. You get all these lymph vessels and, okay, so the thymus gets smaller with age. And then we could ask the question, well, then does that mean that leaves older people more vulnerable to diseases? Which there is a possible correlation there. The lymph node, and as you go through higher classes, you probably will have to know all the different structures involved in lymph nodes and what the different tissues are. But of course, you have to have a lot of capillaries there to be able to have fluids to go back and forth between the circulatory and the lymphatic system. So here's just another illustration. You have lots of lymphatic tissue in the gut. These are called Peyer's patches located throughout the small intestine. So again, we have microbial flora in the intestinal tract. If we change the microbial flora due to taking antibiotics or other types of substances which may harm the natural flora, although we usually talk about the natural flora even more with the large intestine, the immune system can get kicked up. So you do have lots of lymphatic tissue in the gut, and people don't realize that. And obviously, as you can see, these little round dots are the lymph nodes. You have lymph nodes all around the pelvic area, lymph nodes right below the knees. You've got them up here in the armpit, because the doctor, if you go in, they'll check your nodes in your neck, they'll check our armpits, more than likely, sometimes the groin area. One thing that's kind of interesting is, the question is, where does the lymphatic tissue re-enter the circulatory system at? And the right lymphatic duct actually is where it dumps back into the circulatory system. Inguinal, down here around the groin, particularly then are more vulnerable for inguinal hernias that are down in this area. Forgot to shut the door, protect myself. Angela, I think, did the immune system outline. There's a lot more there to study, but those are the highlights. Are we good with the immune and lymphatic systems for high points? Okay. At one point in time, I gave you this. It is. There are just a few extras up here if you don't have one. All right, now, there are really two major types of glands in the body. In the digestive system, we talked about the liver, and we talked about the pancreas, and they actually had little tubes or ducts that went from the liver to like the gallbladder, and then there was like a Y-shaped duct that trickled down and dumped it directly into where it was supposed to go, into the small intestine. The pancreas also has a portion of the pancreas that is ducted. Not a word probably, but I just used it. All right, it has duct. It's a pipe that for the digestive enzymes with amylase and lipase, all the other digestive enzymes. The endocrine system is our focus right now, and the endocrine system is a series of glands throughout the whole body that secrete signaling substances that are just dumped directly into the blood, and they travel by way of the circulatory system to affect their target areas. And the target areas will have little receptors for them. So if I ask you, what is the name for the type of substances that are produced by endocrine glands, you're going to say hormones. Okay, so hormones go through the blood to affect wherever they're supposed to affect. Whereas exocrine glands have little ducts that connect it directly to where they're supposed to go. All right, another thing that I would say, if you look at this chart, in the column that says type, I don't want you to memorize those, except I want you to know which ones are steroids. There are two main types: non-steroidal, which means they could be amines, they could be amino acids, they could be protein in nature. They're usually water soluble. Or in other words, they're hydrophilic, right? And whereas the steroid ones are hydrophobic, and they are fat soluble. Sort of like the vitamins A, D, E, K are fat soluble vitamins. Steroids tend to, they're made of cholesterol. Let me say that. The cholesterol has 4 rings if you look at the molecular structure, and then has a bunch of other stuff on it. So steroids are made from cholesterol and converted and added stuff to it in different functional groups. Pretty complex. Any of you ever been given prednisone for bronchitis or asthma? Or... Very good, yes. It's not necessarily very good, but I just got off a dose myself. I hate taking this stuff. And because I've kind of had a bronchitis thing going on from allergies, stimulated from allergies. So prednisone is a type of steroid, and what it does is, you know, the immune system we just talked about? Well, it shuts down and diminishes the effect of the inflammatory response within your, whether it be bronchial tubes or in your lungs, so that you don't have so much of a fight going on, and it kind of relaxes things a little bit, so they're not as inflamed. So there's a good side and a bad side to taking steroids, and but it does slow inflammatory responses down. But then again, it can also make you more vulnerable to other things.
Would albuterol be a steroid?
Yes.
Or corticosteroid as well?
It is definitely, yes. Yes. Which is the part of usually asthma or some other regimen of respiratory.
And then I guess Motorol would also be one.
Probably, and with that O on the end usually.
Yeah.
Yes.
So does the do exocrine glands also have, does exocrine also have glands? Because on your notes that you took on the front, under exocrine, you put glands.
Yes, there are 2 types of glands in the body: endocrine glands and exocrine glands.
So what are you saying?
Endocrine glands are ductless,
Oh, never mind. I got it.
and exocrine glands have ducts. And a claim to fame statement is, if I ask you which gland in the body is both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland at different parts of the gland, it's going to be the pancreas, because it has digestive enzymes that are duct, and they have hormones that are produced that are endocrine glands producing hormones. So let's go back to this. Another thing that I want to tell you is, I'm most interested in you knowing the glands, the hormones, and kind of the actions. And of course, if you get really caught up, like on a test, you might want to look at this piece of paper if you get really twisted on it. Okay, big picture, there are 2 communication systems in the body. Talking about organ systems, 2 communication systems. One is the nervous system, which stimulates things. And for me to tell my brain that I want to move my arm. The nervous system's doing that. But I also have these glands that secrete hormones, and this is also a communication system. The differences between these two systems, in general, are that the nervous system is faster, and it just is momentary, and then it quits. The endocrine system is slower to respond, and it lasts longer. The actual hormone release lasts longer than what a nerve impulse would do. Okay, let's start with the hypothalamus at the top first. I'm gonna kind of say this is the coordinator. The hypothalamus is actually a part of the nervous system as well. So it's a part of the nervous system and also, which is a part of the brain, and is also a part of the endocrine system. It is like the coordinator of the endocrine system. And if there's a question that asks you about the master gland, or one that does the release of most hormones, it would be the pituitary gland. Okay, my great drawings. Okay, if we go up here first, here's the hypothalamus in the brain, here are the eyes, here's the hypothalamus inside. And there's a little stalk that hangs down, and the pituitary gland is about the size of a pea. It's amazing what this gland does, and it's only the size of a pea. And if you take this gland, which I've tried to draw, if this is the anterior, this is the posterior, and if you divide it like this, up and down, this is the anterior pituitary, and this is the posterior pituitary. Now, the posterior pituitary actually receives hormones from the hypothalamus. And it releases oxytocin and ADH, which is anti-diuretic hormone. Now, if you take a diuretic, it makes you urinate more water out of the body. If you do an anti-diuretic, it makes you retain water in the body. So working with the excretory system. Oxytocin initiates labor, initiates milk ejection. I know you're gonna say this is weird, but this is actually in several textbooks. They also, because most of us, most of the time, are not having labor. And obviously men aren't 99.9999% of the time, okay? So they really kind of say oxytocin is that hormone that gets released when we really are feeling in love and we're really, like.
Displays of affection, I heard, induces.
Yes, definitely. Oxytocin, so it can be called the love hormone. Oxytocin. Right, and it's going to the posterior and the bloodstream. Now let's concentrate on the anterior pituitary because it secretes the most hormones. So GH for growth hormone. Okay, so when we were young,
We had more of this constantly being secreted, right? To grow, to lengthen the bones and make us grow. So growth hormone is there, it's called GH. Some people like to get synthetic GH just to, it's been to kind of cheat a little bit. Parents actually give some of their kids GH. I mean, I have to have doctor's approval, but to try to make bigger basketball players. But what it can end up doing is actually harming the body because of the joints and too much of this. Too much of anything is usually not good.
Isn't there like cases where like people's bodies produce like way too much of it and it's like acromegaly or whatever?
Yes, yes.
Would anabolic steroids be considered a growth hormone?
It's
Those are legal.
similar functions, but the anabolic steroids are really the glucocorticoids, the steroid hormones, which are a little bit different. It stimulates body growth. Prolactin promotes lactation, which is release of milk, which doesn't happen, of course, unless one's pregnant. Follicle stimulating hormone, we call it FSH. Luteinizing hormone, we call LH. Thyroid stimulating hormone. So you see a lot of these stimulating stuff, which means there's a word for it, they're tropic hormones, which means hormones that affect other glands. Yes.
So that stimulates the release of T3 and T4. What actually is the difference between T3 and T4? Because they both do the same thing, don't they?
They're both, you're talking about thyroxine now, not to be confused with the T cells. Totally different. Okay, T3 has 3 atoms of iodine in it, and T4 has 4 atoms of iodine in it. So I just told you something really, really important. What mineral is needed for a healthy thyroid? Iodine. And that's why you're encouraged, unless you're allergic, you're encouraged to buy iodized salt. Because unless you eat a lot of seafood, you're probably not getting a natural supply. As inland as we are, probably not getting a natural supply of iodine. So iodized salt is the main method by which, I mean, before they started using iodized salt, there were all kinds of people having goiters, hypothyroidism, big lumps, masses here. I mean, they still happen, but not as often.
And that's a different form of iodine than if you were to go into the lab and drink the grams iodine.
Oh, sure, it's a whole molecular structure. It's not just iodine. It's an actual hormone structure, but it has an atom, like hemoglobin has an atom of iron in it. You've got this having the iodine. Okay, so let's go back to this. FSH stimulates follicle maturation. That means potential eggs in the ovary to ripen once a month. And production of estrogen stimulates sperm production as well. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. LH triggers ovulation and production of estrogen and progesterone by the ovary and promotes sperm production. Okay, what I think I put somewhere here. Oh, let's go down here for a moment. The onset of puberty is all hormonal. Okay, the hypothalamus receives environmental stimuli, kind of registers how old you are, and other environmental stimuli we don't necessarily understand. And then, this is the hypothalamus right here. The hypothalamus releases gonadotrophic releasing hormone, which then goes to the anterior pituitary, which then causes FSH and LH to be released into the blood. A female, and this is part of the reproductive system as well, these are going to cross over, so the endocrine and reproductive systems. The female baby is born with all of the potential follicles she will ever have. They're held in a stage of meiosis. So she's born with all the follicles she'll ever have. Now, the ripening of the fruit of the follicle, which is normally once a month, once puberty starts, is regulated by FSH. And then as the follicle starts to ripen, think of a peach and the peach pit that's in the peach. Think of the peach pit as the actual egg, and the flesh around it is the whole follicle case. Ovulation is caused by a strong release of LH, luteinizing hormone, which causes the egg to burst out of the follicle case. And that is called ovulation. Then this follicle case becomes an endocrine gland, and it produces progesterone, which helps to prepare the uterine lining for possible receipt of a fertilized egg. And that'll go on for a few more days, and if the body registers it's not been fertilized, then the corpus luteum breaks down, and the endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus, sloughs off, and that's called menstruation. So the whole cycle, now these all regulate males to some extent, but the monthly cycle of the female is a little complex. And the first day of the menstrual flow of the month is called day 1. And then it's like around a 28-day cycle if somebody's regular. And I'm going to go ahead and say it because I know time-wise we're crossing a little bit of systems here. But between day 12 and 16, with 14 being in the middle, is typically the most fertile time of the month for the female. So if you're into family planning, introduction of sperm during that time is going to be your fertile time between day 12 and 16. But please understand that women's cycles can be stressed and changed by emotions, by other things, and they're not always completely regular. The other thing you need to know is that the sperm, they used to say that the sperm could only live about 48 hours in the body of the female. Now they've actually upped it to 2 to 4. So the timing of the introduction of sperm, this is called the rhythm method of birth planning, of course. And with some religions, it's the only one that's truly acceptable by the church.
You mean like 3 to 4 days?
3 to 4 days that the sperm could possibly live, yes.
Okay, so if the anti-pituitary releases FSH and LH into the blood, then why, like, where do all the other hormones come from? Because it just feels like, every hormone is.
You mean
So, like, you're saying that it releases FSH and LH.
at the beginning of the cycle?
So then after that starts, do you just release hormones constantly? I'm just
Well, let's isolate now. The interior pituitary releases hormones for a lot of different things. And reproduction is just one part. Like these two right here, FSH and LH, are reproductive hormones. The rest of the hormones are released when needed. And feedback, this is all about feedback. Negative feedback, shut off like a thermostat, or positive feedback. So there's a constant feedback mechanism in censoring the body. It's very, very complex. And of course, this whole area, and some of you in my lab had to endure my story about my endocrinology problem. But the endocrinologist is the medical doctor that you go to if you have hormone issues. Is probably one of the first people to go to. Let's go down here. The thyroid gland, we already mentioned T3 and T4. We already said the thyroid gland regulates your metabolism, right? The speed of how fast everything happens in your body. And hyperthyroidism would make you, everything's running faster. Hypothyroidism would make you more sluggish. And also, there's another hormone secreted by the thyroid gland, which is called calcitonin. And in effect, what it does is it decreases blood calcium. Remember, we just said calcium's needed for muscle contraction, as well as for other things, bones, teeth. Decreases blood calcium. Do you know what that means? That means that if you've got too much calcium in your blood, and too much of anything is bad too, okay? So too much calcium in the blood, it then shoots it to the bones for storage. But then there's another one called parathyroid hormone, which is
increases blood calcium. So what it does is it breaks down bone. If you don't have enough calcium, it actually attacks the bone, takes the calcium out of the bone.
makes the bones less strong. And this happens as one ages usually, and the osteoporosis situation is a potential issue. It's a delicate balancing act between this calcitonin and parathyroid. Where are the parathyroid glands? They're on the thyroid gland, here at the base of the neck. You've got like one, there's like a butterfly-shaped thyroid, and you've got one parathyroid here, 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 here. So you've got 4 parathyroids that are embedded into the thyroid gland. Okay. Pancreas. This one I want to spend a little bit of time with because we've already said that the pancreas is both an endocrine and exocrine gland. The exocrine part would have to do with digestive enzymes in the digestive system. The endocrine part is really, really important. Really, really, really important. What is the main organic molecule in the body that it metabolizes?
Protein.
Glucose.
Glucose. Okay. Sugar.
Sure.
Sugar. Okay, if you remember your organic chemistry part, you know that carbohydrates, you have the monomers and the polymers, and you have monosaccharides, which glucose, fructose, lactose, disaccharides, which you have sucrose, table sugar, maltose, some of those others, and then you have polysaccharides, which one of the polysaccharides besides chitin and starch and so forth, but one of those polysaccharides is actually in animals, and that's called glycogen. Okay, so what this is, it regulates the glucose glycogen balance in the body. Now, obviously more difficult than what I'm about to say, but there are 2 hormones in the pancreas that are produced in a certain part of the pancreas. One is called insulin and one is called glucagon.
Is that the islands of Langerhans?
Yes, yes, for the insulin, and yes. Insulin reduces blood sugar by causing the cells of the body to take up sugar, glucose, and to bring glucose into the cells. So if it's taking the glucose out of the blood and it's causing the cells to take it up for what process?
Dehydration.
A little more energy focused. What? What's the name for the big process opposite photosynthesis?
Cellular respiration.
Cellular respiration, yes. Glycolysis, then Krebs, then oxidative phosphorylation. So the sugar goes there so that you can have ATPs. All right, and ATPs in order to drive the whole body. So insulin lowers blood sugar, and glucagon does the opposite. It increases blood sugar. Teeter-totter, the homeostatic teeter-totter. Okay, you eat a really high carbohydrate meal. You got a lot of sugar hitting the system right away. The pancreas would be stimulated to produce insulin in a normal situation. And so the insulin would be released into the blood, and it would cause the cells to take in the sugar and use them. Now, let's say it's been 5 hours since you've eaten, and normally your blood sugar is going to start to drop. But you need to keep it at a certain range, around 90 to 100 deciliters, I think, per deciliters. So the liver, and the muscles. Okay, catch this. The liver and the muscles store glycogen. So glucagon's released when you start to know there's not enough sugar, and the glucagon causes the glycogen in the muscles and the liver to undergo hydrolysis to chop this polysaccharide glycogen into monomers of glucose, and then it puts it into the bloodstream. A person who's able to do this balancing act to almost within a short range naturally by themselves is a non-diabetic. Now, there are different types of diabetics, but let's just say if a person can't adjust these right, then you're running into diabetes range. So it's the glucose glycogen, the glycogen in the muscles of the liver break down into glucose, which ships the glucose into the blood to keep the blood homeostasis at a regular level.
Now, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune thing.
Yeah, sort of. They're really not producing insulin in the pancreas. The type 2, as one ages, and it could be fairly young. Type 1 is more serious. Type 2 can be very serious too, but at least you're not born that way, and you're not having it. It's more of a thought of as more of a juvenile diabetes, and usually insulin is involved and pumps. A lot of people are getting pumps now to try to regulate it. Yes.
So basically, if the diabetes, then what happens is that, like, since the body can't produce enough insulin, the glycogen or glucose just like sort of sits in the bloodstream, and
Yes.
the cells can't uptake it and use it for energy.
Right.
Okay.
Very good. And being too much in the bloodstream can cause all kinds of problems, from blindness to, it affects, diabetes is one of those diseases that can affect just about everything in the body and make you more prone to strokes and heart disease and all kinds of issues. So the pancreatic hormones are extremely important. Now, let's go to the adrenals. We've kind of run into this word cortex before with the kidney. The outer layer of the kidney is called the cortex. The inner layer of the kidney is called the medulla. We also have a cortex with the cerebral cortex of the brain. The adrenal glands have an outer part and an inner part, and so it's a cortex and a medulla. The problem that I had with my tumor on my adrenal gland was in the medulla. And so it affected epinephrine, which is also called adrenaline, the production of that, and it's for short-term stress response, increased blood sugar levels, vasoconstriction, which means your blood vessels constrict, which increases heart rate and blood, and so forth. This adrenaline, epinephrine, please know, is known as your fight or flight hormone.
We talked about that in Psych just recently.
Yes, definitely crossover there. And it's also stimulated by the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, which stimulates the adrenal gland in case of emergencies to be able to fight, and it pushes more sugar to the muscles so that you have more, a little more strength, or to be able to run real fast, to get away, or fight or flight. And there are two parts of the sympathetic nervous system. One, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. There are two parts of the autonomic nervous system, which is automatic. One is sympathetic to your cause, and it's like the gas pedal on a car, which speeds everything up, makes you ready for the stress that you're about to see. And in a perfect world, As soon as the stressor is over, there's a brake pedal called the parasympathetic system, which slows it back down, brings it back to relaxation. The problem with today's world, most of us are stressed all the time, and our parasympathetic system doesn't always get a chance to slow everything down the way it's supposed to. So adrenaline or epinephrine, it's the same thing, is the fight or flight, and noradrenaline too. Those both do similar things. And then the cortex, the outer, is where you release the steroid stuff, the glucocorticoids, the mineral corticoids, which have to do with water retention and blood pressure. Long-term stress response, increased blood glucose levels, and immune suppression. So we just crossed over in some of the nervous system too. So we're, yes.
I've heard that like when you do like the deep breathing exercises, like relax yourself, that it activates the parasympathetic nervous system.
It does.
Why it works.
Yes. And during testing, if you have test anxiety, it is a good thing to do the deep breathing. It does help to stimulate the parasympathetic system to slow down and not be as tense. So we do need, that's a very good thing to know. The gonads, the testes in the male and the ovaries in the female produce androgens in the male, and the main androgen is testosterone. And the ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. But also we know the corpus luteum produces more progesterone too when ovulation has occurred. These are all steroids, the regulation of the menstrual cycle, maturation of the egg and so forth. Let me say this, for secondary sex characteristics, again, this is reproductive system as well. The secondary sex characteristics are primarily kicked in by the androgens, testosterone for males to produce the beard growth, muscle, more muscle mass. Shape of the body is a little different usually. Whereas the secondary sex characteristics of the estrogens in particular would be more breast development, the shape again a little bit different, muscle mass not quite as much. Voices usually affects voices too, and the voice box, the larynx. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS. There was just an article on the internet yesterday. Of course, it's been around for a while, this PCOS. Polycystic ovarian syndrome can really cause havoc on a woman's body. And they had a picture of a woman who just gave up because she was a younger woman and she had a full beard. And obviously she probably gets bullied quite a bit, I would imagine. She tried to shave, she tried to have it plucked out, she tried to do everything. She didn't know at first she had polycystic ovarian syndrome. And finally she just said, you know what, I just can't keep up with it. So it showed her, I mean, a very beautiful woman, but she had the beard. And that's because there's a problem in the ovaries with this polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, women can also have a problem with the, I think it's more adrenal cortex, because you produce some testosterone there as well. And sometimes if there's a tumor of some sort there, that can also cause excessive. But of course, we're all mammals, right? So we all have a body with some hair. And it seems to be an hereditary trait. And I know we women don't like to talk about this, but peach fuzz kind of runs in families where you have more hair on your face than some other women do. And it's more hereditary than anything. So. Progesterone is most involved with getting the uterus ready for receipt of the fertilized egg. There's also a pineal gland. Okay, no, wait a minute, let's go back to this picture for a moment of where these glands are. The pineal gland is posterior to the hypothalamus, so it's more towards the posterior part of the brain. And it's a little tiny place too, and that's your gland that responds to amounts of light, seasonal things, all your circadian rhythms, your sleep, and the main hormone is melatonin. And some people need melatonin help. But it can be other things too. So circadian rhythm, melatonin. The thymus gland, we just said, has to do with development of T lymphocytes, and thymosin is there. So, is it really as bad as it looks? Okay. Can you spend some time studying this and going over what each one of these does? Okay, can I have 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start the reproductive system. Okay, the first one up on this page is the female. We're more primarily interested in anatomy and what certain parts do. And this is taken from the side, of course. And I have a reminder here that says the sex of the embryo is determined the 7th week of development. And I've kind of mentioned that before. Female is a default unless the Y chromosome is present with an active our Y gene on the Y chromosome. It turns from female into male organs, transformation from female. These are homologous structures in the female and the male. The penis and the clitoris are similar origin and structure. They both have erectile tissue. They both come from similar origins. It's just a transformation from female into male. Let's look at the female in this bottom first. Now, this is the ovary, 12, the ovary. There are suspensory ligaments which help to hold it with, there are different names for these tubes right here. They're either called oviducts or fallopian tubes, or sometimes even called uterine tubes. Fertilization occurs right about here, the upper 1/3 of the oviduct. If the sperm and the egg are gonna meet, they're gonna meet there in order for it to do what they're supposed to do. Then you'll have the traveling down here and implantation. This is the uterus. You have the endometrium on the inside. This is the actual opening for the uterus right here. So fertilization does not occur in here. Fertilization needs to occur somewhere up in here, the upper 1/3. So this is the upper 1/3. Is the ovary and the fimbriae, fingers of the fallopian tube, are they connected? No, there's cilia that sweeps the egg up and into that area. Yes.
So if you had like an ectopic pregnancy, where would that?
It would stay in either 11 or 10. It would never get down to the uterus, and that is life-threatening. The woman goes into really severe pain. I mean, I've heard of cases, I mean, it's just, they're just screaming. Terrible pain. And that needs to be taken care of immediately. And the only way to do it is surgically. The opening, this is the vagina down here. And the opening, this little part between the vagina and up to the uterus, this is the neck. The neck is called the cervix. So cervical cancer, this is where when they do pap smears that they take cells from this area to test to see if they're cancerous or not. So vagina, cervix, uterus, oviduct, fallopian tubes, ovaries are here. And then up here you see that the bladder is actually underneath the uterus. So now you know why if a person is pregnant, they have to go to the bathroom all the time. because that developing baby right here is going to be sitting right on top of the bladder. So study the organs of the reproductive system, and we'll talk some about the nervous system. Please study that as well. Take your money. Thank you very much for your time and patience.
I think I went over to